The yellow tubing is connected to the pressure manifold and to port 1 of the selector switch. The selector switch is a 3-2 directional control valve. There are 3 ports and 2 positions. We are going to add a red tubing to port 2. Port 3 is integral. It's the exhaust. Notice, as we insert the tubing into the cap end of the cylinder extends. As air rushes in to the sealed barrel, forcing the piston rod to extend. The rod will not retract unless it gets an air signal into the rod end port. Let's move the tubing over to the rod end port. Notice as the rod end receives a signal, the rod retracts. As the cap end receives a signal, the rod extends. Let's look at another 3-2 directional control valve. This one is the black mushroom head spring return 3-2 directional control valve. Port 1 is the pressure applied port. Port 2 is the working port. Port 3 is the exhaust. We have port 1 connected to the yellow tubing to the manifold, and port 2 is connected to now the cap end of the cylinder. When the button is pressed, it's going to force the rod to extend. Since there is no signal to the rod end of the cylinder, the rod will not retract. Let's introduce a 5-2 directional control valve. This valve is pilot operated spring return. There are 5 ports and 2 positions. The 5-2 designation speaks to the number of service ports and spool positions. This valve has 5 service ports, 1 pressure applied to the manifold, 2 exhausts, and 2 working ports. There are 2 spool positions. The yellow tubing is connected to the pressure applied port. The blue tubing is connected to the cap end and the rod end of the double acting cylinder C. What would we expect to see when this pneumatic circuit is energized? Well, the port with the spring is connected to the cap end of the double acting cylinder, and the port with the pneumatic signal from the push button is connected to the rod end of the cylinder. So when we press the button, the cylinder should retract, and when we release the button, the cylinder should extend. This 5-2 pilot spring return directional control valve is a good example of a non-memory directional control valve. As soon as the signal is removed from the pilot end of the directional control valve, the spool is sprung back into its original position. What would happen if the lines of the cap end and rod end tubing were swapped? Well, the logic function will be reversed. As soon as the circuit is energized, the double acting cylinder will retract and will only extend when the black push button is pressed, and will retract when it's released.